They were the industry's power couple, a platinum-selling R&B queen and an ambitious rapper. Together, they graced red carpets, filled gossip blogs with their extravagant displays of love, and had fans convinced they were living a modern-day hip-hop fairy tale. But behind closed doors, their love story was a ticking time bomb. And one night, it finally exploded. This is the story of Kyrese Montrell and Seniyah Rochelle, a relationship built on passion, power, and deep, dangerous obsession. It started with whirlwind romance and public adoration, but as Seniyah's star soared and Kyrese's dimmed, love turned into something much darker. What happens when admiration turns into jealousy? When control masquerades as devotion? When fame fuels an already fragile ego, pushing it to the brink? What started as an all-consuming love affair nearly ended in murder. And the warning signs? They were always there. Before we dive into this shocking case, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales of love, lies, and betrayal. Now, let's get into it. Kyrese Montrell was always the loudest in the room. At 32 years old, he carried himself like a rap mogul, even though his career never quite took off. He had the talent, gritty lyrics, a sharp flow, and a street credibility that made him popular in Atlanta's underground scene. But his temper? That was his real legacy. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder in his early 20s, Kyrese saw medication as a weakness. He refused to take it, convinced it dulled his creative genius. What he called passion, others called rage. His outbursts were legendary. Producers, managers, even friends had learned to tread carefully around him. And when he met Seniyah Rochelle, she became his new obsession. Seniyah, 28, was everything Kyrese wanted to be: famous, adored, untouchable. A powerhouse vocalist with a sultry image, she was already being compared to the greats: Beyoncé, Rihanna, Mariah. She had the kind of voice that sent chills down your spine and the kind of stage presence that left audiences in awe. But behind the glamour, Seniyah was just a girl who wanted to be loved. Raised in hardship, she had spent most of her life chasing security, trying to fill the void of a childhood marked by abandonment. When Kyrese entered her world, he made her feel seen, protected. And that was all she ever wanted. They met at a high-profile music event in Los Angeles. Seniyah was still on the rise then, just beginning to taste the level of success that Kyrese had spent years chasing. He was drawn to her instantly, bold, confident, yet still carrying a softness underneath. She had no idea who he was, but he made sure she did by the end of the night. Kyrese had a way with words, and when he spoke, he made you feel like you were the only person in the room. For a girl who had spent her whole life being let down, he seemed like a dream. Their love story moved fast. One night, she was just another girl at an industry party. The next, she was waking up to diamond bracelets on her nightstand and private jet getaways. Kyrese worshipped her, or at least that's how it seemed. They became inseparable. Late-night studio sessions, lavish vacations, passionate interviews where they couldn't stop talking about how deeply in love they were. The industry ate it up. They were music's golden couple, two young black artists taking over the charts and the headlines. But as Seniyah's career skyrocketed, something in Kyrese started to shift. At first, it was the little things. Kyrese always wanted to know where she was, who she was with, what time she'd be back. It seemed sweet at first. He was protective, maybe even a little jealous. But wasn't that normal in relationships? Seniyah told herself it was. She was used to men leaving, so when one cared too much, it almost felt like love. But love wasn't supposed to feel like this. The first time he raised his hand to her, it was over something so trivial she barely remembered how it started. A male backup dancer, a music video, a move that he thought was too suggestive. They had been arguing for hours, his voice getting louder, his words cutting deeper. She had never seen him like this before, his face twisted with rage, veins bulging in his neck. And then, before she could even process what was happening, the slap came. Hard. Fast. Blinding. Her head snapped to the side, the force of it knocking her to the ground. For a moment, the room went silent except for the ringing in her ears. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just sat there, stunned, pressing her hand to her stinging cheek. And then, just as quickly as the storm had come, it was gone. Kyrese was kneeling beside her, tears in his eyes, whispering apologies. He didn't mean it. He would never do it again. He loved her too much. And she believed him. Because wasn't that what love was? Imperfect? Messy? She had seen worse growing up, men who left, men who cheated, men who never even said they were sorry. At least Kyrese regretted it. At least he made it up to her. That night, he flooded their penthouse with roses. A diamond bracelet sat on her pillow, sparkling under the bedroom lights. "You know I'd never hurt you, baby," he murmured as he held her close. "You just make me crazy sometimes." Crazy. She should have listened to that word. But the cycle had already begun. The slap became a shove. The shove became a punch. The punch became choking. By the time she realized what was happening, she was already too deep, too trapped. He kept her in check with a terrifying mix of love and fear. One minute, he was screaming in her face, calling her ungrateful, a whore, nothing without him. The next, he was holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world, swearing he'd die without her. And she wanted to believe him. Because if she didn't, then she'd have to face the truth. She was no longer in control of her own life. He controlled what she wore, who she worked with, when she could leave the house. Her phone? He checked it. Her team? He made sure no one got too close. He isolated her, whispering poison into her ear until she believed no one cared about her the way he did. "Your family doesn't want you," he would say. "Your friends just want a piece of you. I'm the only one who loves you for you." It was a lie, but after hearing it enough, it started to feel like the truth. The world still saw them as the industry's golden couple, Seniyah, the R&B queen, and Kyrese, the loyal boyfriend who was always by her side. He played his role well, smiling for the cameras, holding her hand in public, beaming with pride when she won awards. But behind closed doors, he was a different man. And Seniyah? She became an expert in hiding the bruises. Makeup covered the damage. Long sleeves in the summer hid the finger-shaped bruises on her arms. If anyone noticed how her smile seemed a little more forced, how her eyes carried a quiet sadness, they didn't say anything. Maybe they didn't want to see. Maybe they thought she had it all: fame, fortune, love. But love wasn't supposed to feel like this. And deep down, she knew. She knew if she didn't find a way out, Kyrese wouldn't stop until there was nothing left of her. Seniyah had spent years convincing herself that things would get better. That the man who had once made her feel like the most cherished woman in the world would come back. That the rage, the jealousy, the bruises, none of it was who Kyrese truly was. But the truth had been staring her in the face for too long now. Kyrese wasn't going to change. If she stayed, she wouldn't make it out alive. The decision to leave wasn't made overnight. It was a slow realization, built up from years of fear and heartbreak. The night he nearly choked her unconscious was the moment she knew she couldn't survive another outburst. Lying on the cold marble floor of their penthouse, gasping for breath, she understood. If she wanted to live, she had to run. She couldn't do it alone. Kyrese had stripped her of her independence, monitored her every move, and turned everyone around her into a potential informant. So she did the one thing she had been too afraid to do for years: she reached out for help. Her management team had been waiting for this moment. They knew. Maybe they hadn't seen the bruises, but they had seen the signs, the fear in her eyes when Kyrese showed up unexpectedly, the way she flinched at loud noises, the way her once unstoppable fire had dimmed. The plan was set. A private security team would be stationed outside the penthouse, ready to extract her as soon as Kyrese left for the studio. By the time he came back, she'd be gone, her things packed and moved to a private location where he could never reach her. It was foolproof. But Kyrese wasn't a fool. Paranoid by nature and fueled by unchecked rage, he had always suspected she would try to leave him. She had been distant lately, her phone always tilted away from him, her conversations cut short when he entered the room. He didn't believe in coincidence. He believed in control. And when he couldn't control her, he made sure he knew everything. That's why he hacked into her phone. It wasn't the first time. Over the years, he had monitored her messages, tracked her location, even impersonated her through texts to push people away. But this time, he found exactly what he feared: plans, hotel bookings, security arrangements. The confirmation that Seniyah was planning to walk away from him for good. He saw red. The betrayal hit harder than any industry slight, any failed record deal. He had made her. He had given her everything. And now she was trying to leave like he was nothing? Like he was some mistake she needed to erase? No. He wouldn't let that happen. Instead of exploding in rage, he did something he rarely did, he thought. He planned. If she wanted to leave, he'd let her think she had won. He'd play it cool. And then, when she least expected it, he'd remind her exactly who he was. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. He kissed her forehead, told her he'd be at the studio late, and walked out like it was any other day. But instead of leaving her alone, he sent a text. "Let's talk. I don't want to fight. Just want to end things right. Meet me at the studio tonight?" He watched as the message was read. 3 dots appeared. Then it disappeared. Then finally, the response came. "Okay." Seniyah had no idea she had just walked into a trap. Seniyah walked into the studio that night, her heart pounding but her mind set. She wanted to believe this was real, that Kyrese had finally accepted the inevitable. That they could walk away from each other without more damage being done. But deep down, she knew better. Kyrese Montrell wasn't the type of man to let go. He was the type to hold on until his grip turned deadly. The moment she stepped inside, the energy shifted. The room was dim, the only light coming from the red glow of the recording booth. The air was thick with something sinister. Kyrese stood in the center of the room, his expression unreadable. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, eerie stillness. "You really thought you could leave me?" His voice was almost a whisper, but the threat in it was deafening. Seniyah took a cautious step back. "Kyrese, She never got to finish. He moved faster than she could react, slamming the door shut behind her, locking it with a single flick of his wrist. She barely had time to scream before his hands were around her throat, squeezing with a force that sent her crashing against the mixing board. The world blurred. Her nails clawed at his arms, but it only seemed to fuel him. His face twisted with fury, veins bulging from his neck. "This what you wanted, huh? You wanted to embarrass me? Leave me out here looking stupid?" His grip tightened. Seniyah's vision darkened. Her lungs burned. The last thing she saw before everything went black was his face hovering over her, filled with something beyond rage, pure possession. Then nothing. When she woke up, it wasn't to the sound of music or the flashing lights of paparazzi cameras. It was the cold, suffocating pressure of dirt pressing against her lips. The taste of blood and soil mixed on her tongue. She couldn't see. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. She wasn't in the studio anymore. She was in a grave. Her body was broken, her head throbbing with a pain so unbearable she thought she might slip back into the darkness. But the fear, God, the fear kept her alive. Kept her fighting. She tried to scream, but the dirt muffled every sound. She couldn't die here. Not like this. Fate intervened in the form of a man no one would have expected. A homeless man, searching the woods for scraps, his footsteps crunching against the earth. He almost walked past her, almost ignoring the strange mound of disturbed soil. But something stopped him. A whisper of movement. A faint, gasping breath. When he knelt down, brushing away the loose dirt, he saw her. A swollen, battered face. Blood-matted hair. The barely there rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. By the time the paramedics arrived, Seniyah was clinging to life by a thread. Her skull was fractured, her body covered in deep bruises and lacerations. The doctors didn't know if she would make it. She slipped into a coma, her fate uncertain. Meanwhile, the world kept spinning. Her fans, her family, the media, they all assumed she had vanished. And Kyrese? He walked away, convinced he had won. Kyrese Montrell was no fool. He knew how to play the game, and when the news broke that Seniyah Rochelle was missing, he slipped into the role of the heartbroken boyfriend with ease. His first move? Instagram Live. Tears streamed down his face as he spoke directly to the camera, voice shaking, eyes red. Man, y'all don't understand. I love that woman. I can't sleep, I can't eat. I just need Seniyah to come home, man. If anybody knows anything, please help. The video went viral within hours. Fans flooded the comments with prayers and theories. Celebrities reposted it, urging the public to help find Seniyah. News outlets picked up the story, painting Kyrese as the devastated lover clinging to hope. He wasn't done. Kyrese sat down for interviews, dressed in all black, looking hollow-eyed and broken. He spoke about their love, how he had been planning to propose, how Seniyah had been acting strange before she disappeared. He fed the media a carefully crafted narrative, one where he was just another man blindsided by tragedy. And for a while, people believed him. But the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. Detectives were already suspicious. Something about Kyrese's grief felt performative. Too polished. Too rehearsed. And when they started digging, the cracks in his story became impossible to ignore. Seniyah's last known location? Kyrese's studio. Security footage showed her walking in that night. But she never walked out. They pulled Kyrese's phone records next. His location history placed him in one very specific place at a very specific time, the same secluded woods where Seniyah's broken body had been found. And then there were the text messages. Kyrese had wiped his phone, but technology never forgets. Forensic teams recovered deleted messages, one of which was sent to his best friend hours after Seniyah vanished. Shit handled. She ain't coming back. It was all the detectives needed. Kyrese Montrell had spent days begging the world to help find Seniyah Rochelle. But the truth? He knew exactly where she was the whole time. The world thought Seniyah Rochelle was gone. The headlines speculated, fans mourned, and Kyrese Montrell basked in the sympathy. But deep inside a hospital room, in the quiet hum of machines, the truth was fighting its way back to life. After days of lingering between this world and the next, Seniyah's eyes fluttered open. The beeping of the monitors filled her ears. The light above her was harsh, blinding, but she was alive. Barely. She couldn't speak. Her throat was raw from the breathing tube, her body broken in ways she hadn't even processed yet. But she had one thing, her mind. And she knew exactly who had done this to her. A nurse rushed to her side, tears in her eyes. Seniyah, baby, can you hear me? Weakly, with trembling fingers, Seniyah reached for the pen placed beside her bed. The nurse quickly handed her a notepad. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body, but she pushed through. Her hand shook as she scrawled out 5 letters, slow and deliberate. Kyrese. It was all they needed. Authorities moved fast. Within hours, police stormed Kyrese Montrell's recording studio, where he sat surrounded by his entourage, smoking a blunt like he hadn't just tried to erase a woman from existence. The moment officers walked in, the energy shifted. The room fell silent. Kyrese barely flinched. One detective stepped forward. Kyrese Montrell, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Seniyah Rochelle. His boys stepped back, their loyalty only going so far. Kyrese smirked, shaking his head like they were wasting his time. Y'all got nothing on me. He didn't resist. He didn't fight. He let them slap the cuffs on him like he had all the time in the world. But for the first time in his life, Kyrese Montrell was about to learn. His time was officially up. The world watched as the courtroom doors swung open, cameras flashing, reporters yelling questions that no one would answer. Inside, the air was thick with tension. This wasn't just another celebrity trial. This was the trial. The one that would define justice for Seniyah Rochelle. Kyrese Montrell sat at the defense table, dressed in a tailored suit that couldn't hide the cold arrogance in his eyes. His legal team whispered to him, but he barely acknowledged them. Across the room, Seniyah sat with her team, her face stoic, but her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the table. She had survived hell, and today, she was finally going to speak. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out the forensic evidence, the traces of Seniyah's blood found in Kyrese's studio, the GPS records that placed him at the burial site, the security footage showing her entering the studio and never coming out. Every detail was a nail in his coffin. But it was Seniyah's testimony that broke the courtroom. When she took the stand, the room fell silent. Even Kyrese, usually smug and unbothered, shifted in his seat. Her voice, though steady, carried the weight of every bruise, every betrayal, every moment she thought she was taking her last breath. She told them everything, how he lured her there, how he wrapped his hands around her throat, how he whispered to her like she was nothing before leaving her for dead. A few jurors wiped their eyes. Others clenched their jaws, their expressions dark with anger. Then came Kyrese's turn. His lawyers painted him as a man tormented by his own demons, a victim of his mental illness. He claimed he had blacked out, that he never meant to hurt her, that the Kyrese who did that wasn't him. But the lack of remorse in his voice, the way he barely looked at Seniyah, told a different story. The jury saw it. The judge saw it. The whole world saw it. When the jury left to deliberate, no one expected it to take long. Less than 2 hours later they were back. The room was tense as the foreperson stood. Guilty! The word rang through the courtroom like a final, brutal note in a tragic song. The judge didn't hold back. His voice was sharp, his disgust unmistakable. He called Kyrese Montrell a danger to society, a man who had shown no remorse, no humanity. Then, with a firm and unwavering tone, he handed down the sentence. Life in prison. No parole. No second chances. Kyrese's face remained blank, but the room around him erupted. Seniyah exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. For the first time in years she was free. And Kyrese Montrell? He was finally where he belonged. Kyrese Montrell thought he was untouchable. He believed his fame, his connections, and his ability to manipulate would keep him above the law. For years, he controlled Seniyah Rochelle, convinced she would never escape him, that she would always return no matter how much he hurt her. But in the end, it wasn't her love that saved him, it was her survival that destroyed him. Seniyah lived. She fought back, not just for her life but for her freedom. And in doing so, she exposed the monster that Kyrese had tried so hard to hide. He had fooled the public, played the grieving boyfriend, shed crocodile tears on social media. But the truth couldn't stay buried, just like Seniyah. Now, while she rebuilds her life, standing stronger than ever, Kyrese will spend the rest of his days behind bars, forgotten by the industry he once dreamed of conquering. No more cameras, no more crowds chanting his name, no more power. Just cold, gray walls and the deafening silence of a future he can never escape. What do you think about this case? Were there warning signs that should have been taken more seriously? Could Seniyah have been saved sooner? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story shocks you, make sure to like and subscribe to this channel for more real-life tales of love, obsession, and crime.